Hey guys, this is going to be a response to AngryVegan, who has responded to my video, why veganism is stupid. Now, first of all, I'd like to say that I like your presentation. First of all, most vegans I had to deal with in the comment section of that video were pretty much trolls, or thinking that I'm not serious in my position or that I'm retarded or something like that, even though I did put a, a, a quite an amount of effort into thinking these matters through. And just for the record, I've actually been vegetarian for 7 years in my life and vegan for about 6 months out of those 7 years, and I've also been vegetarian before that, but usually it was interrupted by me going back to eating everything, and then again going back to being a vegetarian in different stages until I decided to commit myself to being a vegetarian for 7 years. And the reason I stopped being a vegetarian doesn't really have anything to do with the reasoning that I provided in my video, but more out of health reasons. At some point, I became anemic, and I had to take iron supplements just in order for me to actually function normally in my day-to-day life. And I understand that if you actually do a vegan diet, you can have all the nutrients you need. I'm not arguing with that, because I can actually accept that and grant that. I don't really mind. I mean, the video of mine isn't really about nutritional reasoning for being vegan or not vegan. Neither is it about me saying that it's wrong for people to choose to be a vegan, but rather why I personally think that most of the reasonings people use to justify being vegan rather than being meat eaters, or the reasoning they use to try to tell other people or meat eaters that they're immoral, is flawed. Like I said before, I like your presentation, and I like the fact that even though your channel is called AngryVegan, your response was pretty chill. I mean, you didn't really attack me or anything like that, and I appreciate it a lot. Now, I'm gonna try to only put in this video the points that I actually have something to say about, because a lot of it is repetition, probably because some of my video was also included some repetition of points. But I'm going to try to respond to your arguments to the best of my ability, and I'm actually pretty happy to have a back and forth with somebody who can respond rationally about this topic. First and most common vegan argument that I ever hear is basically animal suffering. They try to tell you that because you eat meat, that makes you an evil, immoral person, because you cause unnecessary animal suffering just to satisfy your appetite. And I'm going to demonstrate why this has absolutely nothing to do with the reason why vegans don't eat meat, and why they're full of shit.
Yeah, you're right. Veganism really isn't about suffering. That isn't at the core of the issue. It's one of the factors to consider to go vegan, most certainly, but that's not at the core of the issue. And Peter Singer is very consistent on this, that the core of utilitarian philosophy, regardless of species, is the idea of interest, and that some beings happen to have greater interests in matters than others do.
If I'm getting your point here, it is that basically animals are capable of having interests while plants don't, and that humans can actually relate to this, because humans also have an interest of staying alive, and so do animals. And I don't actually agree with you on this point, that animals have the capability of having any kind of interest whatsoever. Animals are instinctual beings, and it's not that they actually think about things, or that they actually have any kind of mental capacity that would allow them to think about things enough to be able to have an interest in them. Even if we're talking about things like survival and staying alive and not suffering, an animal doesn't know what suffering is. All it knows is that when it does suffer, it's painful, and the instinctive response is to try to get away from the source of what's causing them pain. It's a defense mechanism, like I said in my video. It's not precisely that they have an interest in avoiding pain. It's more like they're biologically predetermined to try to avoid pain, even in such a manner that it's predictable exactly how most animals would behave in certain situations, that we can artificially introduce them to, and we can predict pretty much exactly how the animal is going to behave in each situation. This leads me to think that animals are not actually smart enough, if we can kind of phrase it like that, even though it's not exactly the case. They aren't smart enough to have the capability of having any kind of interest whatsoever.
And if you can reasonably accommodate someone else with a greater interest than you in a particular matter, then you should. And when something is as trivial as palate pleasure, and then you weight that against the interest of another sentient being, the other sentient being, you know, their life is always going to have a greater interest to them than mere palate pleasure will to you.
Since we're going to touch upon sentience later on, I think it's not going to be a very good use of time to actually expand upon it right now, or anytime soon until we actually reach the point where I talk about sentience in my previous video. But I'm just going to say that I disagree with your point in that you think that plants have no interest in living and surviving. Basically, I would argue that plants and animals have the exact same interest in staying alive. Because if you say that they have an interest, as in they are able to mentally contemplate what it takes to stay alive, or they have a kind of wish to survive, then neither animals nor plants have this kind of capability. But plants absolutely do have an interest in surviving, if you're talking about the way that they are and the way that they are designed by evolution. Cows, for instance, are designed by evolution to want to survive by avoiding danger and other kind of stuff like that. Plants are designed by evolution to survive by using a lot of different other kind of mechanisms, like dandelions spreading their seeds with the wind currents, or flowers being attractive to bees so that they can pollinate other flowers. All these complex systems don't arise without the plants having an interest in surviving. Now, it's not exactly a sentient interest in surviving, but it is absolutely their nature to wish to survive. I basically asked them a really simple question.
The simple questions are usually the loaded questions, but we'll see where this goes.
Which is, if animal suffering is your main reason behind being vegan, then what if I go in the wild and I shoot a tranquilizer dart at a wild deer? Would you eat their meat with me? 100% of all vegans, to be fair, except one single vegan I've ever asked this question, have told me no. So, animal suffering doesn't really have anything to do with it, does it?
If you asked me that question, I would say no for plenty of reasons. I mean, number one, you know, I've weaned myself off of animal flesh, and I just had no desire to. I mean, I would probably say the same thing to you. That'd be like you asking me if I want to eat tree bark. No, I don't want to eat tree bark.
Well, if you noticed, I use a lot of hypotheticals in my video because, first of all, I'm really fond of thought experiments, and second of all, the thing is, I'm trying to discuss the morality of eating meat. So if you don't want to eat meat because it's unpalatable to you, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But obviously, you can't use that as a rationalization for you trying to tell other people that they shouldn't eat meat, because basically it would be like me saying, I fucking hate bagels, so I don't think anybody should be allowed to eat bagels. Clearly, I cannot do that. So meat not being palatable to you might be a very good reason not to eat meat or not to eat that particular deer. But again, we're talking about a hypothetical, so let's just add to that hypothetical where meat is absolutely palatable to you and that you would actually enjoy eating it. If that were the case, would you eat its meat with me? I mean, I could take it just to the other step to accommodate also you meat not being palatable to you. And another thing I can do is extend this to animal products instead of just meat. If you've noticed, I haven't even touched upon animal products at all in my video, but rather talked only about meat eating. And the reason for that is because I think that as long as we haven't yet established that eating meat is morally wrong, or killing animals for food is morally wrong, then clearly using animal products for food is not established to be wrong either. So, in the same way that I'm talking about this kind of hypothetical where the animal isn't suffering for us to eat its meat, I could just as well say that we could develop some kind of agricultural system in which the animals experience no suffering whatsoever, and the animal products are extracted from them as well without causing any kind of death or animal suffering whatsoever. You don't have to actually hormonally induce cows producing more milk. You could actually do it naturally. It might not be as effective, and that is a completely separate discussion. But it is possible to do without causing any kind of suffering whatsoever. So there are some kind of solutions for it not being palatable to you as well. I'm sure that even though you wouldn't like eating meat as much as you wouldn't like eating tree bark, I'm pretty sure that there are animal products which you would like to eat. For instance, honey or eggs or unfertilized eggs, obviously, or stuff like that, which don't have to entail animal suffering at all or animal death at all.
And the other thing that drives a lot of vegans or people to become vegans is the idea of speciesism. They reject it. So knowing that, you have to ask yourself, when you're talking to a vegan, you have to understand that they view other animals in the same moral light as they do human beings.
I actually find it hilariously ironic that vegans would choose not to eat meat because they don't want to be speciesist. The thing is that the only group of people that I can imagine to be speciesist are vegans, basically, or maybe also kosher Jews that keep kosher. They also have a kind of arbitrary kind of guideline as to which animals are okay to eat and which aren't okay to eat. Or Muslims also don't eat pork and other kind of stuff, but only these kind of groups of people I can find speciesist, and I'll get into why. Basically, my guideline as to the morality of killing organisms for food is very simple. I don't have any kind of artificial divider between the different species. I consider all living organisms of all varying species to have the same right to exist and live and reproduce as any other organism. And I don't put any kind of arbitrary dividers when it comes to sentience or having a nervous system or any kind of biased kind of reasoning like that. I simply say, if I need to eat, then it's okay to kill an organism to feed myself, because my highest priority is my survival, and it is also consistent with being moral, in my opinion. But vegans go ahead and say no, 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 no. These species are not okay to eat. They're if you eat them, you're an immoral person. These species, you could pretty much kill them as much as you want without feeling any kind of without it having any kind of impact on your morality. Vegans, correct me if I'm wrong, but almost no vegans at all feel any kind of guilt for killing plants. Am I wrong about this? And if I'm not wrong about this, then aren't vegans speciesist no matter how you look at it? And about the part with vegans treating animals the same way they would treat humans, I could actually flip this thing around and put it a little bit differently. Vegans feel that it's okay to kill plants but not animals because of reasons A, B, C, and D. If it's sentience, suffering, the ability to feel pain, having a nervous system, having an interest to live, and so forth. Because of these reasons, animals differ from plants, therefore animals are okay to eat. So I could say that the same way that vegans treat plants, omnivores treat animals, because animals are also different from humans by reasons A, B, C, and D, like sentience, the ability to understand what pain is or what it actually is and what it's doing to you, and that it's not always smart to avoid pain. They have a greater capacity for pretty much any of the list of things that differ plants from animals. So therefore, it would be okay to eat animals.
So you have to sit there and you have to ask yourself, what do you think their response would be if you asked them to eat a human being who had just been shot by a tranquilizer dart?
Like I said a moment ago, there is at least as many differences between humans and animals as there are between animals and plants. The thing is that I even believe that there is a vastly larger amount of differences between humans and animals as there are between animals and plants. Our intelligence alone and our ability to reason and contemplate morality at all are by itself enough of a difference between humans and animals to dismiss any kind of arbitrary connection between humans and animals. If you're going to say that animals share these kind of characteristics with humans, obviously, because the particular animals that you're talking about are much more closely related to humans than plants are genetically. So obviously, the human brain, which is designed to recognize patterns, would find a cow much more easy to relate to and feel empathy towards than a plant. But I hear vegans arguing that since we humans have developed the ability to reason morality, it is our responsibility to avoid eating animals and reduce their suffering, since we have the ability to do so. But because our brain is so developed, even to the point where we can contemplate the morality of things, and according to vegans have the responsibility to do so, it also grants us some other capabilities, like understanding that empathy is a biologically given mechanism, just like feeling pain is, and that the brain, which is built for pattern recognition, is basically just fooling us into thinking that animals are like humans just because our pattern recognition can see a face in an animal that is much more close to the face of a human than a plant is. And still, we have the ability to ignore this and understand that it's nothing but a trick that our brain is playing on us, just like seeing a face in a doorknob or something.
They're probably not going to eat them either for the same reasons that they're not going to want to eat the deer. It's because we acknowledge that most humans, even after they're dead, or they're going to die, that we still kind of respect their wishes, especially when it regards their own body.
This doesn't really have anything to do with the actual discussion, but from my perspective, a dead person doesn't have any kind of right whatsoever, because a dead person is dead. There is no somebody to have a right. It's a corpse. It's inanimate. It's a decomposing mass of organic matter that's gonna eventually feed bacteria and plants and animals and so forth. That's all it is. There's no somebody to have a right. So, not that it has anything to do with this topic, I just wanted to say that I don't think that it's such a valid reasoning to think that since we humans have traditionally given dead people some sort of rights and recognition, or recognition of existence as if they still exist even though they are dead, or treating their memory as if it's some kind of tangible thing. I think that this is just plain bullshit. I think that it's a kind of primitive kind of way of thinking about things. And when it comes to animals, it becomes even much more ridiculous.
Even though that person is dead, we still try to respect their wishes. That, look, they probably wouldn't want us digging up their bodies and eating their dead bodies.
I can actually accept the fact that most humans would not wish to be eaten after they're dead while they're alive, and they had such a wish. I think that it is also safe to say that not a single animal has ever existed that had actually wanted for people not to eat its corpse after it died. I can guarantee you that not a single animal that has ever existed ever had this kind of wish for its body to remain intact after it died. No animal has any kind of capability of contemplating such a thing, and it's just ridiculous trying to assign animals some kind of human some kind of human wish that even a human making it doesn't really make much sense.
As though their wishes don't matter. So, I mean, I would imagine that that's how a lot of vegans feel, but that's how I would feel about it, is I would sit there and I would look at it from the deer's perspective.
How exactly can vegans put themselves in a deer's perspective? I don't really get this kind of argumentation. You can't do that because you can never be inside the brain of a deer. And you don't even know if it has any kind of perspective. As far as science knows, they don't have any kind of perspective or look on things. They just react to stimuli and different environmental situations. That's all they do. That's all they can do. They don't have any kind of ability to reason about things like vegans try to assign them.
You know, so do they really want me to eat their body, especially when I don't need to? You know, and I would just err on the side of caution, and I'd say probably not.
How do you know that? How do you know that a deer would have any problem with people feasting on its body after it died? How can you possibly know something like that for you to say probably not? How do you know? Have you ever talked to a deer about this? Like, well, did you read any kind of deer manuscript that explained their position about that kind of thing? That's ridiculous. You can't. I don't understand this kind of way that vegans try to assign animals human characteristics and human thinking patterns. I'll grant that a lot of animals are sentient while a lot of other animals are not sentient, but their sentience isn't at the level at which we can assign them human thought patterns and characteristics. The brain is just simply not capable of that.
I mean, the way that you proposed the hypothetical is this deer was shot by a tranquilizer dart. Okay, so odds are it would still live, right? It's not dead, so it still has a chance for living if someone doesn't come along and kill them, which I presume is you in the hypothetical, that once it was tranked then you would come along and slaughter it. And they would probably feel at that point that if they joined you in it, that's sort of like condoning what you were doing, or like taking part in what you had done that to them was needless.
The thing is, that's exactly my point in that kind of hypothetical in the first place. My entire point was that as soon as you look at the example of eating plants versus eating a tranquilized animal, both of them are right now in the exact same state. It doesn't matter what the animal previously was, and besides, I use this example for several reasons, but one of them being obviously that it experienced no kind of suffering whatsoever. But also another use for this example is that right now there's absolutely no difference morally between killing a tranquilized animal that is incapable of feeling any pain, incapable of having any kind of anxiety from the idea of it being killed or anything like that. Right now, it's in exactly the same state as an immobile plant that also has no kind of capability of feeling anxiety over it, of being about to be killed. So that's exactly why I use this example. So if you say that vegans wouldn't condone that, that's exactly my point. Why wouldn't vegans condone one? Why would vegans condone one and not the other? That is exactly my question. They just have this kind of arbitrary line that they draw between certain types of organisms that they decide that are evil and immoral to eat, to other organisms which are fine to eat, and you can kill as many plants as you feel like it. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't have any kind of impact on morality.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that you can eat as many plants as you like. Like if tomorrow I ate all plants on planet Earth, yeah, that would be pretty fucked up of me, don't you think? So no, it's not like there's an unlimited amount of plants that we can eat. Obviously, at some point, you can harm plants so much that you wind up harming total ecosystems, and then guess what? All the sentient beings that you cared about can no longer survive.
I think you kind of missed my point and steered away from it a little bit, and I'll try to. I don't really feel inclined to respond to that. My point really was that my point wasn't really that I can't conceive of any kind of situation in which eating a whole bunch of plants would be bad. It's just that I'm saying that when it comes to the question, is it moral or not to kill plants, most vegans would say that there is no moral issue with killing plants, and their number doesn't even matter. Let's just leave aside the amount, okay? Let's forget about that for a moment, because that was kind of an unnecessary distraction that kind of took you away from my main point, which was basically, is killing plants moral or not? Why do vegans think that it is moral to kill organisms? As many as they like was basically referring to that it doesn't matter even if you kill a gazillion plants. Most vegans would not think that you were an immoral person at all. You kill plants without even giving them any kind of choice.
What choice does a plant have if you allow them to live? They have no choice.
Well, I would argue that animals as well do not have a choice in the full sense of the word. When I'm saying a choice, it's because of a lack of a better word to refer to the rights of a plant, it being a living organism, to live. And I think that there are a very select few species of animals that have the capacity to choose things. And if plants don't have choices as to whether or not they want to live, then neither do most animals that vegans don't eat.
They don't have a brain. What's there to choose from?
Well, having a brain itself is not really sufficient for having the ability to choose. And even if an animal does have a brain, it does not necessarily mean that it has the ability to choose. brains are, for the most of the animal kingdom, just another organ that has its function in the body, as in facilitating instincts and the way it is genetically programmed to react or behave, in addition to physically sending signals to the organs to move, and in the case of feeling pain, signaling the right organs to move away from the source of that pain. All this is still not sufficient for actual choice to take place.
It's like if I was comatose and someone killed me, did they rob me of a choice? I mean, assuming if I was in a comatose state and everyone agreed that I would never ever wake from it, and my brain no longer works, and then someone comes along and stabs me to death, killing me for, let's just say I shit on the front porch one day or something. If they killed me, do they rob me of a choice? No, I was never going to be able to choose from option A, B, C, or D, because I was never going to wake up. I was never going to use my fucking brain again.
Well, at that, chickens can't choose between options A, B, C, or D either, so would you agree that it's okay to eat them simply because they lack that ability to choose? So if you use that justification for killing plants simply because they have no ability to choose to live, then chickens have no choice as to whether or not they live or die either. They're just programmed to do things to help them survive, but they don't actually have a kind of capability to choose. And plants also have, they're also programmed to do certain things in order to survive and do certain actions in order to ensure their survival. But the same way that you wouldn't grant a plant's ability to act in certain ways as a choice, I wouldn't give a chicken choice either. But you say that killing animals is wrong because they're able to feel suffering. Well, what is suffering? Basically, all it is activation of the nervous system. So basically what you're saying is that you should not eat animals that have a nervous system.
We already have the parameters of what suffering is. Now, maybe we can have a discussion, an honest discussion about maybe we should change the definition of suffering.
I think that the right move before we actually decide to change the definition of suffering is to actually establish what exactly the definition of suffering is, because it does seem that vegans differ with their opinions than most people. By killing a plant, you're killing its ability to produce any offspring and so forth. You're killing it no matter how you look at it. It's a living organism no matter how you look at it.
Veganism is not the positive claim that it is good or okay to kill plants. It's indifferent to the matter.
While I do generally agree with the point that veganism is not a positive claim about whether or not it's okay to kill plants, rather it's a positive claim about whether or not it's okay to kill animals, I do generally think that the vegan point of view entails it being morally okay to kill plants for food, while it not being okay to kill animals for the same reason.
And as has been pointed out by many of my fellow vegans, the other non-vegans, time and time again, supporting animal agriculture or relying upon other animals or relying upon the nutrition of other animals does not in any way help plants if you are actually concerned about plants, because other animals inevitably rely upon themselves or other animals to eat plants. Any omnivorous lifestyle will always necessarily wind up harming more plants in the process than any sensible rational, reasonable vegan lifestyle will.
I've specifically stayed away from this argument that I commonly hear from vegans pretty much in every single discussion I ever have with them, simply because I believe it to be completely irrelevant to the question at hand, which is the question of the morality of eating meat or an omnivorous lifestyle. Now, the reason I think that it's irrelevant is basically vegans, I at least I hope vegans would not argue that humans should stop feeding cows or any other animal for that matter, or that the cows have no right to eat animals in order to survive and grow up and reach the age and to reach the stage in which they're right for us to kill them for our food. And since no vegan would actually argue that the cow has no right to eat plants to reach mature age, I don't understand why they actually use the amount of plants that the animal had to eat before it was actually used to feed humans as any kind of argument for as any kind of argument to try to demonstrate that that agriculture that involves living organisms like cows and pigs and such harms more plants. So what exactly do you propose? Not to feed cows? Like what exactly do you propose? All beings need to feed in order to reproduce and to survive. That is not a point of contention at all between vegans and non-vegans. So it's not exactly true that in order to eat a cow, I had to harm a whole bunch of plants first. The existence of this cow is a given fact. Okay, so now, right now in the present, I'm presented with a choice to eat an animal or to kill this cow to eat, or to kill plants to eat. And again, all this is still not relevant to the question of morality of eating meat whatsoever. But I just thought I'd address it somewhat. I have to admit that I haven't put too much thought into this argument simply because I believe it to be irrelevant. But the thing is that I don't think that this argument is valid because, like I said, in the present, there's a cow and there's a bunch of plants, and I am facing the choice of which one is moral to kill for food and which isn't. So the amount of plants that cow had to eat up until now is pretty irrelevant because that cow, in order for it to survive and reach that age, would have to eat a bunch of plants whether or not it was okay to eat meat in this universe that we're talking about.
Because animals have to eat other plants. It is a wasted use of resources to do that.
I would like to know what your proposal for this is, that farmers should just stop feeding animals altogether. Like, what exactly is your proposal? The only way in which I could imagine a cow not taking any resources, as you put them, I don't really consider them resources, I consider them living organisms, but let's just put it in your perspective as plants being resources, since they are actually consumed for food. Well, the only possible kind of solution I could see you proposing here is to actually let cows out in the wild to feed off of grass and stuff. That is also basically killing a bunch of organisms, but it just doesn't take the resources away from feeding other types of animals or humans, or plants for human consumption or animal consumption. But I honestly don't see any kind of difference between grass and corn when it comes to the right of that organism to live. But again, let's just put that aside for a moment. What exactly are you proposing? Could you explain that? I mean, clearly we cannot stop feeding cows. We can't just send them out into the wild. That would mean their death for sure. And are vegans really okay with that? That for for humans to stop animal farming, we should kill entire generations of captive cows that have depended on humans to feed them. Please explain what you propose as an alternative mechanism for farming and so forth. What would you be okay with the complete extinction of the entire species of all species of cows just because it takes away resources? I clearly would not argue that. I think that the cow has a right to eat plants the same as I have the right to eat cows.
You will never get the same amount of nutrition out of an animal as you will putting it into an animal.
This is somewhat reasonable, but the bottom line is not it's not exactly accurate. The way things work is basically you get pretty much the same amount of nutrition you put into the cow out of it, but in different forms. I mean, the end product of cow meat has definitely a lot of resources put into it compared to the amount that the cow can actually feed. But the cow's flesh isn't the only thing that it isn't the only way in which it provides nutrition. Cow shit is used to feed and fertilize plants, which in turn are used as food. So again, they do provide nutrition with their dung, as well as with all the carbon that they exhale as carbon dioxide. It gets absorbed into trees using photosynthesis, and the different plants using photosynthesis, and those plants in turn get eaten. And all the unusable parts of the cow get decomposed, and they feed bacteria, and those bacteria provide nutrition in turn to things that feast upon them, and so forth. That's the cycle of life. That's how life works. Now, the only thing in which the only way in which I can see in this kind of model that I just explained, where more nutrition went into the cow than it put back, is actually the carbon dioxide that it exhales, which might be a lot. And the thing is that it's only because of our lack of because humans lack the ability to turn most of the carbon dioxide we put out into the atmosphere and turn it back into organic matter that we can use for food. And only plants have this ability, and we're pumping out more carbon dioxide than plants can actually reincorporate into the life cycle thing. But that must be by a very minuscule amount per cow, so I honestly don't think that it is entirely accurate to say that more nutrition went into the cow than you got out of it. I think that it's pretty much the same amount. The second most common argument that I hear from vegans is kind of a non-argument, because basically they say that you shouldn't eat meat because you have to kill animals for it. But like I said before, you have to kill plants to eat even as a vegan, so that doesn't really make you any more moral than a meat eater, because this causes death and this causes death.
I was gonna let this slide, but you keep bringing it up. The killing that goes on of plants on a vegan diet is very small. In fact, you can be a vegan and never ever kill a plant.
That is not entirely true. You can't be a vegan and never ever kill a plant. You would be a fruitarian if that were the case. And there actually is such a group of people with varying degrees of fruitarianism and extremism in that kind of worldview. Basically, there are fruitarians that only eat fruit because it doesn't actually harm the tree. And I see this as vastly more moral a worldview and a lot more consistent than veganism. Now, I clearly wouldn't be one, since I honestly don't find a moral problem with killing organisms for food at all. But if you Um, if you honestly think that there's a sanctity of life that needs to be respected towards certain groups of animals, then clearly the more moral position is where you can accommodate even where you can accommodate even the wishes of plants not to be killed and something like that. So why aren't you a fruitarian? Could you tell me why? And if you could tell me why you're not a fruitarian but a vegan, that will tell you exactly why I'm an omnivore and not a vegetarian or a vegan. Because any reason you can come up with that would justify you killing plants rather than living off fruit could be twisted around to be used as an argument for meat eaters to be allowed to eat meat. Eating bread is basically killing a bunch of organisms. Any kind of vegan food you eat involves a lot more organisms killed than eating meat.
And that one organism is sentient. Okay? I mean, putting all environmental factors aside, all ideas of ecosystems, if you were to put me in a room with one cow and trillions of plants, and you told me I had to kill trillions of plants, or I had to kill that one sentient cow, I would kill the plants in an instant. Because that cow has an infinite amount more sentience than any number of fucking plants you could possibly imagine.
Remember that we were discussing that veganism is not a positive claim that it's moral to kill plants, but rather that it's indifferent to it. And that I said that veganism actually does entail accepting that there is not really a moral problem with killing as many plants as you want. Well, like I said, I understand that veganism is not actually the positive claim that it's okay to kill plants, but like you demonstrated yourself, it does seem as if you would, in a heartbeat, kill trillions of living organisms which are not sentient. The only thing they lack in this case is sentience, at least according to you, and you weigh all of the lives of all of those plants as not even coming near, or as you worded it, infinitely less important than this one cow. And that is the mindset that I have problems with, because, like I said, suffering and sentience are reasons. And I can even understand a little bit about the emotional drives, the emotions behind it that drive vegans to choose that kind of moral guideline. But I think that it is terribly speciesist and immoral to behave in such a way, or to accept such a mindset about the morality of killing living organisms. Why is it that sentience is this one characteristic that is the deal breaker for you when it comes to animals? Why is sentience so important? Is it mainly because you're biased because you are sentient? Why don't you think about it from that perspective? Why look at the picture from such a narrow perspective as you being sentient, therefore you have significance, therefore sentience has a huge significance in your opinion. But in the grand scheme of things, and when we do take into consideration ecosystems and that kind of stuff, plants have a lot more weight to carry on this planet than the parasitic organisms like we are and like cows are. They are the ones who basically have any right to live whatsoever, because those are the energy providers. Those are the ones that receive the solar energy and provide the energy to the rest of the living kingdom. So I think that plants deserve a lot more respect than vegans actually give them. And I find it really hard to disagree with my position on that. And that's why I honestly think that vegans have this kind of cult mentality. It's pretty much the same as people saying, if you're not a Muslim, then you have no right to live. You know, so that kind of reasoning is basically saying, okay, since I and my moral guidelines are such, then therefore they apply to everything in the world. Vegans should understand that they don't have the right to choose death for millions of organisms simply because it conforms to their moral system. At least without contradicting themselves logically. I'm not required to make any kind of arbitrary decisions as to what I should kill in order to eat and what I should not kill.
Wait. So are you literally saying that you don't think at all about who you may or may not eat when you're hungry?
Not about who I eat, but about what I eat.
Not at all. Not cats, dogs.
Nope. I have absolutely no problem with people choosing to eat cats and dogs. If that's what they feel like eating, then go ahead. That's fine. I have absolutely no problem with this. And I do agree with some vegans that saying that it's okay to eat cows but not okay to eat dogs is hypocritical and kind of retarded. But that's not my position at all. I've actually put some thought into this. If you would ask me, would I eat a dog or a cat? I would say, well, first of all, it would be a good idea if I didn't know that cat or dog beforehand, because even if I would have a pet chicken, I wouldn't really feel comfortable eating it. I could eat other chickens just fine. And if people would know how to prepare dog or cat meat so it would be palatable to me, I would have no problem eating it if I was hungry at the time and I felt like eating it. I have no problem with that. I'm pretty sure that it's just not tasty, but I don't think that there should be any kind of distinctions between organisms as to whether or not they're okay to kill for food, like I said plenty of times before.
Humans?
I can't possibly imagine any argument that is more utterly stupendously dumb than this one. I'm sorry, but I commonly hear this from vegans all the time. They say, well, if it's okay to eat any kind of living organism for food, then why don't you eat humans? Well, why don't wolves eat wolves? Why don't hyenas eat hyenas? Why don't lions eat lions? Well, the reason is pretty simple, because that would be detrimental to the survival of the species, and therefore they're biologically predetermined not to do so. And humans are exactly the same thing. We are biologically programmed to shun away from eating members of our own species, because evolution made sure to guarantee that that is the case, because clearly a species that has both a low rate of reproduction like humans do, or like mammals do for that matter, and you couple that with cannibalism, the result will pretty much always be extinction. Because as soon as you get into that kind of realm, then you must define by which guideline do you discern between the different types of organisms, which belongs to the group you should kill and which belong to the group that you should not kill.
Again, sentience.
Okay, fine. Sentience. Then please define for me what you mean by sentience. What does sentience entail? Later on, you're going to get into this and explain that what constitutes sentience is having a central nervous system. And again, I think this is kind of arbitrary, because you have to now justify why only creatures with a central nervous system are sentient, while creatures with just a normal nervous system are not sentient, and also why creatures with central nervous systems are sentient rather than just creatures that have a brain being sentient. Or maybe we could take it another step further and claim that only creatures that have brains that are capable to process information that they get from the environment through their senses, only those creatures are considered sentient, and creatures with only a central nervous system or a normal brain that all it does is move the different various body parts are not considered sentient. Or you could take it another step further and consider maybe creatures with the ability to respond to situations in the environment sentient, with all other creatures with more primitive brains not being sentient. Or maybe you could take it another step further and argue that in order for a creature to be considered sentient, it needs to have the capability to recognize itself and to know that there is a self for them to actually refer to. Apes are actually able to do that. They're able to recognize themselves. If you put an ape in front of a mirror, and I've seen a pretty interesting experiment where you could paint some kind of marker on the face of an ape and put it in front of a mirror, and by looking at the mirror, it can clean the stain without actually looking at its own face. That tells us that apes are able to recognize that what they're seeing is a reflection of themselves, and therefore they understand that there's a themselves at all. Maybe only creatures that are capable of that are sentient. Maybe you could take it another step further. I mean, there's various, almost endless variety in the stages of development of the brain from a nervous system into a completely cognitively active brain like humans have. And you could find various organisms in every single stage that exists today. So it all boils down to you basically basing your entire lifestyle and dietary decision and moral system, at least at least when it comes to ideas of what you should eat or not, or what is okay to kill for food or not. You're basing all of this on something so vague as sentience. I find it kind of absurd. And you could never actually find two people who agree exactly which creatures are considered sentient and which aren't. Sorry for the noise. And since there is all this ambiguity, is it really a rational position to base your entire moral guidelines, all of your moral guidelines, on this ambiguous thing? The third most common argument that I hear from vegans and vegetarians is basically, you shouldn't kill animals, even for food, because animals are like us. They have emotions and they have a highly developed cognitive ability. And again, I can prove that this is nothing more than a lame excuse. And again, I do it by asking an extremely simple question. And the question is, would you eat shrimps, fish, or clams, for instance, just to name a few? 100% of all vegans that I've asked this question told me that they would not eat these kind of animals. And they would even go ahead and call them animals.
Because they are animals? I mean, what are they? Fungi? Plants? Protista? Maybe? I don't know. They're not animals, and what the fuck are they?
I actually do accept this criticism, but basically all it was is that I worded myself really terribly. It's not that I'm not aware that these animals belong to Kingdom Animalia. What I was actually meaning to say, and it came out completely awful, was that I don't understand why vegans assign the same value of sentience to shrimp as they do to other animals that are more commonly referred to as animals, like cows and chickens and dogs and cats and bats and that kind of stuff. Because there's a very distinctive difference between the sentience value of these different kinds of animals. And grouping shrimp together with dogs as sentient beings is clearly problematic because their sentience value is completely different and on completely different levels, even though they have no more capacity for intelligence and emotion than plants do.
Well, there is a little bit of debate, I guess, on the matter of clams. They have a nervous system, but they don't have a central nervous system. A central nervous system has an extremely high correlation rate with sentience.
First of all, I think that the way that you worded this is problematic because what exactly do you mean by a central nervous system correlating with sentience? What we're talking about here is sentience, not things that correlate with it. Now, there are sentient beings that have a central nervous system, and there are non-sentient beings that have a central nervous system. That is exactly my point here, that defining things as sentient is extremely problematic. Therefore, basing your entire lifestyle choice on depending it on this definition of sentience becomes really problematic and leaves room for a lot of ambiguity.
So that leads most people to just assume that any being with a central nervous system, which shrimp and fish have, so I don't even know why you're including them in this conversation at all, that they probably have sentience.
So the bottom line is, you're calling fish eaters immoral because they are probably sentient. Does this make sense to you? Does this seem reasonable to you to tell people that what they're doing is wrong because you think that the creatures might be sentient?
Now, mind you, this is largely, and even if a lot of vegans can't 100% say that those animals have sentience, what do they have to lose by simply not eating them? They're erring on the side of caution here. I mean, if they don't have sentience and you don't eat them, okay, how does that hurt you? How does that hurt them? It can't possibly be bad for them to be left the fuck alone by us.
Can you argue that it wouldn't be better off for plants to be left alone by us as well?
Meanwhile, if they do have sentience and we, for whatever ignorant reason, think that they don't, and then we consume them and eat them, how is that justified at all?
Well, it's completely justified if you do not base your decision on sentience, which in my and most other people's opinion is completely arbitrary. So there again, it's nothing more than a lame excuse. Intelligence has absolutely nothing to do with the reason that you don't eat animals.
True, intelligence does not matter, per se. If someone can prove that intelligence somehow gives one an ability to have more or greater interests, then so be it. But as far as I can tell, as far as I'm sure most other people can tell, intelligence is not a prerequisite for interest.
Point taken. Now, the reason why I think that vegans are in a cult, especially the ones who followed into veganism after watching Gary Yourofsky, I think his name is, who gave a speech on why meat eaters are the most evil, vile people alive, and why vegans are the saviors of the world and that kind of stuff. He's obviously a cult leader.
What? What? What?
That last part, I gotta say, I find it kind of funny.